Earth. Fire. Water. Air.
Hey yo, what's good? Welcome to The Gist with me, Jared. I've got some special guests here with me today, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Go ahead.
What's up, everybody? You may know me from the Last of Us video, but my hair is a little different. My name is Jedd. Good to see you.
Hello, I'm Jager. I'm very pleased to be here.
Awesome. So we just got done watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, the live-action adaptation on Netflix. All of us had watched this series when we were younger, quite a long time ago, and we were wanting to binge watch the entire season, and we were fresh off a few hours of sleep from binge watching the first season of Avatar: The Last Airbender. So if you're not familiar with the story, there are 4 different nations who control the elements: air, water, fire, and earth. So the 4 nations used to live at peace, but then the Fire Nation decided to attack. And then the Avatar is the being who controls all 4 different elements. He had vanished and now is returned. So, with the first season of this live-action adaptation, what are your initial non-spoiler thoughts as far as how you felt like this first season went? Jedd, we'll start with you.
Non-spoiler impressions of Season 1, Avatar: The Last Airbender. I thought that it was pretty good. I will actually give it probably 6 to 7 out of 10. I think that they kept pretty faithful to the source material, the cartoon, and with what they were trying to do in regards to the cartoon, I thought it was fun. But then there were just other things that I feel that maybe they didn't do too well in terms of adapting it from cartoon to live action. But overall, I think that it was still an enjoyable watch. And as an old fan of the Avatar: The Last Airbender, I thought it was pretty all right in terms of like as an homage to the old cartoon. So,
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I thought the show was fairly good, even though I came off from it not very pleased with what we got. I'm obviously somebody who cares a little more for the narrative and the story, and I thought it was a little bit shallow. It was a lot more kid-friendly and kid-centric instead of a more mature or higher brow, elevated kind of storytelling. A lot of the CGI I was really impressed with, even though it's not, Avatar Blue People level of CGI. But even with the bending, I really enjoyed that aspect. I like the combat that we saw, both with the bending and without the bending. And it really felt like this was a true adaptation for Avatar: The Last Airbender, but the animated series. All the casting was great. I love the Asian dominant cast, and I liked seeing the costuming. Everything felt like it's an actual in the Avatar world. And I think some things that I would say for somebody who's not familiar with the source material is that this is going to be a pretty tough show to grasp, being that a lot of what we see gives Easter eggs and nods to the animated series.
Right.
And I think because of how the narrative played out, it would be a little tough to grasp why the characters are doing certain things or why they're going to specific places.
Yeah.
Because I felt the story was pretty rushed. Like, we're getting to places really, really fast.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And it's hard to compare this show to stand on its own versus what we were seeing in the animated series. I know we often took a pause after each episode to determine, well, did that actually happen in the animated show, or did it happen in this way in this live action adaptation? How did they do it again
in the cartoon? Like, what did they do then? Yeah.
Exactly. So I thought like some of those aspects were a bit challenging to try to disassociate the animated inspiration from the live action one, but also realize that they're trying to balance what we saw and give credence to the animated show, but then also make their own. And I have my own opinions on what they did well or didn't do well with the live action adaptation, but I think it's a decent show. Again, it's not anything narratively super compelling outside of maybe one character, and we can go over that in more spoilery detail here in a little bit. But overall, I thought the show was pretty decent. I think some aspects of it were a little unclear. It would be easier to tell this kind of story in the animated fashion like they did in the series. But when you transition to the live action format, I think there's a little bit more detail that's required in order to have a better narrative. But Jager, what did you think as far as the live action adaptation in season 1?
You know, Jared, I really went into the show without expectations, and what I got was a live action adaptation of a show that I loved that was packed with detail and things heavy on the interpretive side. And with this live action show, I see the independence from the animated TV show into our live action series. And it was very simple and detail oriented. There were things, like you said, those references or those Easter eggs, those events that really tie the alignment between these two shows. And I feel they did a fantastic way of portraying that connection. So as an audience member, it was very enjoyable to see these characters come to life.
So I take it you like the show.
I don't know, I'd say that's really tough. I wouldn't say I'm in a position to where I like or dislike, but I'd say that I'm content with what we have so far, especially with noting how different and similar the animation to the live action series is.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a lot of similarities, and they definitely give credence and nods to what we had seen in the animated show. And now we'll get to the juicy part, the spoilers, the things that we're trying to not say, but now that we're in the spoiler section, we're going to go over the things that we really liked about the show and the things that we didn't like about the show.
You've been warned, all right? Remember the time, we're in spoiler territory now, so if you don't want it, get out.
So let's start off with our favorite moment and our favorite episode for the series. We had 8 episodes in this live action adaptation. Jedd, what would you say was your favorite moment or episode that you had seen?
So, Jedd, I got two-part answer for you. Because in terms of a favorite kind of moment, I would say, I actually say that the fight between Zuko and Aang, where Zuko couldn't firebend because they were in the Earth Kingdom, I'd say I actually enjoyed that moment a lot, because if I remember right, there was an instance where those two had to fight, and I think Zuko couldn't firebend or something like that. My memory of the cartoon is just a little bit hazy, so I know I need to rewatch this whole series again, prior to season 2 or just sometime soon. But I think that there was just a degree of mastery from Zuko's end in being able to fight without using his fire, and I think that just kind of shows Zuko's character's ability to not only be a skillful martial artist, but also to be skilled in the ways of fighting without his fire bending, right? And I think that was just really cool, because that's always something that I admired about Zuko. Like, he wasn't the most greatest firefighter. He wasn't the greatest fire bender ever, but he kind of was able to add to that by being a good martial artist. I mean, you can also even see it with how skillful he was as the Blue Spirit, with the whole Puhai stronghold thing that he had to break Aang out of. He was able to fight with his Dao swords. He was able to fight with just his hands in the Earth Kingdom. So those combative moments, I'd say, is more so probably my favorite moment. But if I'm gonna be honest, boys, I mean, I think my favorite episode was maybe, the introduction to the Kyoshi Warriors. You know what I'm saying? I'm a huge fan. You know what I'm saying? It was a great time. I love the actress Suki. I think she was able to come off as the strong warrior that Suki is in the cartoon show. But also, I think that they kind of were able to integrate the introduction of Kyoshi in a way that wasn't so weirdly nuanced with today's, I guess you could say, climate in terms of how people feel towards certain things. They were able to do that in a way in the live action show where I think it was cool. I think it was natural, as opposed to how they did it in the cartoon show, which was okay for its time. The way that they were able to kind of bridge the two together, I think it was really cool, and it was fun to play out. And I honestly wanted just a little bit more to kind of develop within what happened in the show on Kyoshi versus what happened in the cartoon show. But with what we got, I think it was totally fine. Suki did great. Yeah, Suki did great for sure. You know what I'm saying?
And Jager, what would you say was your favorite episode or moment of season 1?
Episode, moment. I love both of those words, but where I'm leaning towards is the blanketing essence of Iroh's presence. How Iroh is a continuously encouraging character. And I am a huge fan of how that essence is sort of an extension from the animated series. It's a huge connect from the animated series. How Iroh's influence deeply affects Zuko, and how it could potentially affect so many other characters. Like we are introduced to the names of some of Zuko's crew members and how they are, forgive me if I'm wrong, but they are considered the Fleet 41, and how they were considered the worst, the expendable army.
They were the
expendable fleet.
The class with the newest recruits.
The new recruits. And how Iroh embraced Zuko and Iroh embraced them. And I love how Iroh and Ozai, I love how they argue, and I love how they communicated. Because I use the word argue, but it was necessarily two men who have two different viewpoints, but enough respect for one another to acknowledge those viewpoints. And that was really, I don't know the exact word for it, but something that lasted throughout the show instead of anything like super substantially momentary. It was more like this instead of like this. And in speaking of moments, I love how Iroh directly quoted from the animated show Zuko's Breath of Fire when Zuko was going into the North Pole without Iroh, especially from being blown up. Iroh had to reassure Zuko that Zuko is as courageous as he is. He is as connected to his fire as he is. And I feel like that really speaks volumes about both of their characters and the roles that they play in each other's lives. And I feel like that's so sentimental, and it brings about the compassion that the Fire Nation has. But as for moments, my favorite moment, it's a fight sequence. I really loved when in the North Pole, speaking about Zuko's Breath of Fire, we didn't necessarily see him say that Katara rises with the moon and he rises with the sun like we did in the animated series. But we did see both of their parameters for, yeah, I know how to bend when they face each other. When Katara really embodies her warrior energies, like, no, Aang, go inside. I'm about to handle this. And Zuko's like, I bet. And then we just see Katara and Zuko in combat. And what I find really noble is Zuko notes that Katara's found a master. And then Katara notes herself as her master. And then I feel as if that just exemplifies Katara's evolution with her bending and the prowess that Zuko has with his bending. Because I remember this one sequence where Zuko was trapped in ice, but then he just broke out in an explosion of fire. And that was phenomenal for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good transition to my next question here, your favorite character of the series. And I know for me, both in the animated show and in the live action adaptation, Zuko's my clear favorite of the show. I loved his character arc in the animated series and even in this one. Like, I would say this show starts off pretty strong for me. Like, they set the narrative in the world pretty well in terms of the despair that these people have and why they needed the Avatar to come at the time that they did. But then 100 years later, why the Fire Nation is in such power. So when we see Zuko, we're introduced to this pretty abrasive, nationalistic, very divided kind of young man. Like, he has this loyalty to his nation, to his father, but then he has this internal struggle of what he believes in. And I loved how we saw that in the live action show, where we see him start off as this very kind of arrogant and prideful young guy. Then as we get more backstory towards the end of the season, we see where he comes from and why he's acting the way he is. And then, like you were saying with General Iroh, or his uncle Iroh, we see the kindness and the compassion of his uncle start to break down the hardness of his heart, if you will. And he softens up and starts to realize and become his own person. And I know for me, my favorite moment was when we learned the story of the 41st Legion. In that episode, it was episode 6, where he was breaking Aang out of the
Pohai Stronghold.
Pohai Stronghold.
Yeah.
And General Iroh gives the story for why Zuko isn't the man that his Legion paints him out to be. Because they see the very aggressive, assertive, dismissive young man.
Like arrogant, little just punk kid. Yeah.
And he's conducting himself that way because that's what his father expects from the Fire Nation, and that's what he grew up believing. But then he also has this other way of life to live in terms of what he sees with his uncle Iroh. So I love that we saw that payoff, because when we had it, maybe it was earlier in that episode or in an episode before, they talked about how the 41st Legion was going to be sent to die because they were expendable. When they were doing their war plans, they were determining that this legion, this group of people, we're going to send them to battle knowing that they're going to die. But in terms of our greater purpose of conquering the rest of the world, the Fire Nation was willing to let these people go to their death for a losing battle. And I could almost sympathize and empathize with the militaristic side, that it's hard to have a war with no casualties. But then I also get what Zuko's going, that even the weak can become strong, that life is valuable. And I love that they showed that, and how the consequences of his decision led to him leading that 41st Legion, and it changed the hearts of all those men. And I thought that was an awesome moment. And we even talked about that wasn't in the animated series. And that's what I love about adaptations like this, like the ways that they can enhance the...
like bring a story further, like go into more detail, like maybe this is why, in this example, Zuko is the way he is. Exactly.
Like, how can you improve what we already know, or what the fans have already seen in the animated or the inspirational format? So that's what I really liked about season 1 and my favorite character. And I know you said your favorite character was General Iroh. Outside of Suki, who would your favorite character be, Jedd?
That's actually a very good question. I haven't really put entirely too much thought on who really stood out to me in terms of a character, because I agree Zuko's character arc so far was really cool to see. I really loved, like how you were saying, Jared, the whole story with the 41st Legion. I thought that was just a really cool way to show how honor is so important to the character of Zuko. At the same time, though, I really enjoyed seeing Sokka kind of grow to be kind of who he was as in terms of a leader and a I suppose you could say thinker. I know that engineer, thinker, mechanic, right? The hard thing with the live adaptation, right? I think that one of the biggest kind of things you have to keep in mind when you're watching this show, but then you have the cartoon in your head as well. They have to go quicker, right? Like the cartoon, 30-minute, 20-minute episodes, maybe 22 episodes per book, right? They had time to kind of where they could develop things or just tell little stories, right? The adaptation had 8 episodes, an hour each. They had to really put things in there that would develop characters in the way that they needed to, but they needed to make it quick as well. I'm always going to die on this hill that Sokka's character development in the cartoon was just absolutely amazing. I mean, we saw him go from, you could almost argue, honestly, like a misogynistic, stereotypical, I'd honestly maybe say, kind of like, not like coward in its sense, but he was kind of just weak, right? But then you can see him grow and be humbled and put through certain things that challenge his worldview to where he becomes a leader, a man, worthy of a sword made out of space rock and leading the entire invasion in the cartoon. And you may not get that entire experience in the live adaptation, but you do get parts of it. I know. So when we get first introduced to him as Sokka in the live adaptation, you feel familiar. There's he's protective of his sister. He has a very big inclination of duty to protect his tribe because his father left that responsibility to him. And I would say as you go and watch him more throughout the show, the comedy is like, it was getting there. I could see the jokes. I thought it was fine.
Right.
You could see how he learns more what it's like to be a leader and to have this commitment to duty and what it means to be a hero, especially in what you kind of see at the end. I think maybe what his biggest thing was this whole battle, internal struggle of being a warrior as we know a warrior to be versus kind of being a hero, and how being a hero in his sense kind of relates to him personally. I think that we kind of get that a little bit with his conversation with Sai, I believe his name was, where Sai is saying, hey, maybe, there's always a whole thing of like what you're asked to do, but then there's another part of where you find what you need to do and you need to go after that completely. And Sai was thinking that for Sokka, it should be an engineer. For me, in the live adaptation, it was a little bit weird because I always put that two together in the cartoon, but to kind of see him go through like I need to be a warrior like my dad, or I need to be more of a strategic thinker, strategist, like how I feel more comfortable in being. See him kind of being able to put a bit of the two together, working to put the two together, and then ultimately working to be a hero in terms of saving Yue and maybe not necessarily being the warrior that he wanted. I think Sokka would probably be my favorite character in light of adaptation so far. But it's definitely, I'd say it's still up in the air. We might need a season 2 of more of the characters to figure out what's going on. So, what about you, Jager? What was your favorite character, or who's your favorite character?
So as we said previously, it's Iroh. But in bouncing off of what you both have said about your favorite characters,
Zuko and Sokka.
I feel as if there is a huge connection between these two characters. And bouncing off first, we see Zuko and the 41st and how his compassion can prevent those casualties and potentially create an even greater, like Iroh, blanket over the Fire Nation instead of Ozai's initial strategy of, okay, these guys are expendable, we can get rid of them, instead of Zuko's idea where we could potentially see these guys in a greater light. And I know that in the live action series, it wasn't Zuko's plan to have them as his crew. But then we see, as Zuko stood up for the 41st, it was Ozai's idea that said, okay, if you want these guys, they're your crew now. Let's see if these guys, we could prevent these casualties and make them stronger.
Very cool moment. I don't know, that was actually very okay, all right.
And in connection with Sokka, we see Zuko gaining his honor, but then we see Sokka's conversation with Yue's father saying, you don't have to be a warrior to be a hero. And I feel like that is Sokka's theme throughout what we see, because as we are introduced to these characters in the live action series, we see in episode 2, I think, where Aang says,
episode 2, the Kyoshi words.
Oh, well, it might have been episode 1. Hold on, sorry. It might have been episode 1. We see Aang volunteering himself to get captured, but then having to say to Sokka, I've never had anybody fight for me before. I think you are the bravest person I've ever met.
I think that's episode 1, but yeah, that was a really cool moment too.
And I believe that Sokka really took that as a testament to being brave and courageous and continuing that attribute. Because apart from this animated series, we see Sokka volunteer to go save that weird kid instead of being so argumentative against that idea. We see Sokka really place himself in those shoes. Yeah, I'm gonna protect you. Dad said to protect you, so that's what I'm gonna do. And then the same thing with Zuko, it's such a connection to his character to where Dad said this, all right, I'm gonna do this. So I feel like that's a huge connection between Sokka's and Zuko's characterization. And then what's crazy is we bring my favorite character into it, Iroh, who I see so much potential in being that blanket for these characters. And not only the animated series as we see, but I'm excited to think about and then react to what the live action series has in store for us regarding it.
Can y'all remind me?
Leaves from the
whatever.
Falling so slow.
Can y'all remind me, did Sokka and Iroh interact in the live adaptation at all?
Not in the live one.
No, not in live one. Did
They
they
didn't.
interact in the cartoon a little bit?
Way later, probably.
Wait,
feel like
pardon
we're
me, what was
really
your question again, sorry?
Did Sokka and General Iroh interact at all in either the live adaptation or the cartoon?
I don't think it was as explicit, but maybe in the animated series when the White Lotus gets together and Sokka's like this big planner.
Well, I think there's a lot of things to like about season 1, but I would be a liar if there were things that I said I didn't dislike about the show. So with the dislikes, I've got to be honest. Like I mentioned in our non-spoiler portion, I think the narrative was really lacking for me. When I think about good storytelling and where our main character is, our main character should be Aang. And when I think about where his character develops, he starts off as a prodigy, but who is neglecting his purpose. And I think by the end of the series, he's basically still at the same spot. And I honestly had a hard time, even though I liked his performance and it felt like Aang, I didn't like that about the show when it comes to your main character and basically the headline guy. Yeah. I feel like he needs to have at least some aspect of development in his character, even though he struggled with what he was destined to do in saving the world and how to save the world. I feel like he's still at the same point, versus I think it would have been better to have him either accept being the Avatar or take steps to be the Avatar. Versus what we see in the last episode, he's just letting things happen versus being proactive in his part in saving the world. And I find that kind of one of the parts that kind of describes where there are a lot of nice things that happen in this series, but when it comes to actual depth and narrative and things being placed in the beginning but paying off in the end, I think those can be not as frequently seen. Like we had that with Zuko and other characters, not so much for me. Like there are a lot of moments, like we got the Secret Lover's Tunnel, we got the Cabbage Guy, and those are cool because we remember them from the animated series. But again, if you hadn't seen that, I would think it's going to be hard to...
Why is this happening? Or like,
exactly.
To
determine, like, okay, well, why are we jumping from here to here?
Yeah.
When I think they could have taken their time a lot more to flesh out these characters, to flesh out their motivations and where they're at, and then make it clearer to see, like, why is Aang wanting to go to the northern water tribe, and then why is he detoured so much? And I think the lack of clarity for passage of time was hard to follow with the story, because we don't know how much time passed between Aang waking up versus Aang getting to the Northern Water Kingdom. It was very hard to follow when it comes to a story like this. But Jedd, we'll go to you. What are some of the things that you didn't like about season 1?
Oh man, Jared, what did I not like about season 1? You hit the nail on the head. The pacing was just a little bit weird in terms of like we don't know when kind of like when Aang first wakes up to versus when he gets to the Northern Water Tribe, and kind of like my little thoughts on that too in terms of what I found wrong. I felt like it was really rushed the entire season 1. I felt they were it was too rushed and they were doing way too much in terms of like, I think what made Avatar Last Airbender cartoon one of the most like beautiful things that you could ever watch was the development of characters over time. I mean, what do we want to say? Zuko's arc, Aang's arc, even the development of Sokka as a leader in the cartoon series, right? This one, it felt like almost they were just throwing as much things as they could to be an homage to people who know the show already, versus doing it justice and taking time to show you what these characters' motivations are, or what their internal struggles are, what they're deciding in their heads. I think that you kind of mentioned it maybe just a little bit, Jared, but Aang, the whole time, I feel like he just couldn't stop saying, like, I don't know what to do, like, as the Avatar, or something like that, or he couldn't accept it the whole time. And in the pacing that they had, it felt like almost like that was out of place. Like, after everything he's done in terms of the spiritual experience that he had, saving the people that he did, his experience with King Boomy, I would feel maybe at the time he should already kind of learn to accept his whole role as the Avatar, especially with the whole King Boomy test thing that they really rushed to. For me, it just didn't really make sense in terms of what they were trying to really establish. It almost felt like more they were just trying to, hey, you guys remember this from the cartoon? You remember that from the cartoon? As opposed to, let's take this from the cartoon and really explore on it, expand on it in the live action, while still keeping track in terms of, let's get to the Northern Water Tribe as the end point. I think the biggest things that come to mind with what was wrong with the show were the like doing too much in such little time, rushing it.
Right.
And one such thing was definitely, I've already expressed this to them while we were watching the show, but spoilers again, the lightning bending from Azula. And honestly, maybe just Azula's whole relationship with Ozai. I just, oh man, they dropped the air ball on that one. I just,
Man, like we talked about when we were watching the show, Azula was also one of my favorite characters. And it's funny because I'm not even like a Fire Nation kind of guy, but I find myself identifying with the Fire Nation characters quite a bit, whether it's Ozai, Zuko, Iroh, or Azula. Okay. And Azula, again, was one of my favorite characters in the animated series. Yeah. And when it came to the portrayal, I just didn't like the take that they went with the portrayal of Azula. Like we talked about last night, she seemed more petty, and in the animated series, she's way more cunning and intelligent.
Cold, calculating.
Sinister. Mm-hmm. And this, she just seemed like,
oh, Dad, or like Ozai's giving Zuko attention, so I need to do things to get attention too. Lightning. And
right, it seemed just like a sibling rivalry versus her actually gunning for the throne.
Yeah, I'm trying to conquer the world with my fire.
And that's what I was talking about when it came to like earned payoffs. Like, you can get to the end point of her being the leader of the battalion, but you have to show us in the earlier part of the season her being that excellent militaristic leader. Like we saw how Zuko, he made the wrong decision when it came to, well, from the Fire Nation's perspective, the wrong decision.
Azula, constantly formidable. Pardon me.
In the animated show. Yeah. But we didn't see that. When we saw her in the live action, she messed up in terms of her combat skills, and then she was, her strategy, Ozai saw directly through it, where she was trying to position herself against her brother versus actually creating a good strategy. Yeah. It's when Ozai was saying, well, Zuko was the one who found the Avatar, Azula. Stop trying to be coy.
Coy whispers and self-flattery.
And that's just, that didn't seem like authentic to the actual Azula.
Sorry, but in speaking of Azula, Azula is, bye-bye, Zuzu, you're disregarded. Like, bye-bye, Zuzu, like, I don't even need you. Like you're not even a motivating factor for me.
Yeah, she shouldn't be super concerned with what Zuko's doing with the Avatar because she has her sights set on something bigger. But it seemed like in the live-action adaptation, they pitted them one against the other a little too much for me. Yeah. And even with the lightning thing, like, again, we talked about it in our breakdown or in our initial reaction last night. I think the lightning should be way more earned, but
Yeah.
like you said, it seemed a little too rushed.
Like they were just like, oh look, now we can do lightning too. It's like, really?
It'd be different if Azula had perfect blue fire at the beginning of the
Yeah.
series, because that shows that she's an exceptional firebender.
Which she is.
Versus what we got was
Right.
she still has a lot to learn. Isn't wrong, but that doesn't mean you can show that she can accomplish a pretty tough task of lightning bending by the end of the show just because she was a little mad. I don't think that narratively works out very well.
No, I hated it. Oh, call me a Fire Nation like soldier because I'm burning up because it ain't good, man. That was so lame.
What about you, Jager? I know you like the show a lot more than I did in terms of your impression of the show, but is there anything that you would say that you didn't like about the live action adaptation?
You know, I think I'm crazily in a similar place to you both. I feel like when in regards, and especially stemming from Azula right now, is we have so much characterization and I don't know if notoriety is the right word to use for the other characters, but then for Azula, it's like so watered down. See, in the animated series, we're introduced to Azula as already, but then we have to develop our team avatar.
Right.
But then in the live action series, it was almost as if team avatar is already like, okay, we're getting to it, but then Azula is also getting to it, instead of
Azula's
Team
already
Avatar.
there.
Who's that?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
and with the live action series, we see, especially for myself, in already seeing the animated series, I think the live action branched off from the animated series, but from knowing the animated series, it was a necessity to adapt to, okay, that happened later, but we're experiencing it right now. So what are they going to do with it? And in reacting to that, I just place myself as an audience member. Like, okay, this is a completely different creative endeavor.
Yeah.
Now
Definitely
let's see
keep that
what
in
they
mind.
do with it.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, it's this happened like that, but now it's all right now.
Yeah.
And we even talked about that last night, that I would ask both of you, like, did this happen this soon? And we discussed that, no, these events happened in book 2, book 3, but it is an interesting creative decision to have it all happen in the first season. But again, from my point of view, you could do that, but you have to make it work narratively. And I think with the pacing of the show being way too fast, I didn't think it worked out for their good when it came to
War
the show.
balloons, like already in the beginning. And, like,
Right, war
that was
balloons
the
right
thing,
there.
like, that came very later because they
Yeah,
were still
in the-
developing that technology.
With
And I was like,
Sai in the Northern Air Temple.
Yeah.
But instead of the Northern Air Temple, we
It's
don't even get
Omashu.
introduced to it. Yeah, but it's Omashu.
Right.
And
it's just kind of like a weird. They threw it all together,
And I don't think it was necessary to do that. Like, there was so much meat in book 1
so
that they
much
did a lot.
that we could have spaced out.
Exactly.
And we could have, developed a deeper connection.
Right.
And I don't want to use the word rushed because I could understand that it's hard from a directive standpoint, from a
Sure.
writer standpoint, for so many people to consume. And I feel like this directly correlates with how different Azula's character is in the animated series to the live action series, especially with how we see in the animated series Azula's perfect blue fire. And imagine how traumatizing, and imagine how much success that she had to have accomplished before we even are introduced to Azula, to have that blue fire, to have the extension of lightning already.
yeah.
And that's what made the flashbacks for Zuko so valuable. Because we see the reasons why we're introduced to this abrasive, arrogant, harsh character, but then we see the reasoning behind in the later episodes that got him to this point. So narratively that works when you're telling the story.
Yeah.
And then even for Aang, the moment I liked about Aang was that he was too powerful and he almost killed a few other airbenders. I love that part. But then again, like we talked about, when it came to where you start, where we see the character, where we're first introduced to them, and then where they end up at the end of the show, some of them had great arcs. To me, that was Zuko. Iroh we didn't see much change in him outside of like what we in hearsay know that he's like this legendary brutal dragon of the West guy, but now he's the almost pacifist kind of guy.
Like a constant
calming.
Yeah, a constant conscience.
But we know that, like, not every character has to go through this grandiose arc of change.
Yeah.
But for the characters that we see, some of them I think they executed well versus others.
Yeah.
One other one that I want to bring up is Katara.
I was about to say, you haven't even mentioned Katara at all, but Katara, what were you going to say first, Jared? Yeah,
so,
go ahead.
While I really liked how they developed Katara in the animated series, part of me wanted her to earn her mastery of water a lot more in the live action, because we saw her bending the sphere of water at the beginning, but then it seemed like she got things...
Evolution.
Yeah, like...
episode evolution.
Even though they had moments where she was struggling to do the whip, struggling to harness it internally, I think just because you can get to a point of being successful with waterbending, that doesn't make you a master at the end. So that part of it was kind of like, that felt a little pandering to modern day politics for me, as far as like the women and the patriarchy with Paku.
Yeah.
I love that they kept it in there because it would have been safe to take it out.
Yeah.
But in terms of being a master already, I think that they could have done without that and had her take a lot more time.
Yeah, like work on it a little bit more.
And I don't think the fight with Paku should have been that equal, because we have Katara, who hadn't seen combat. Sokka was the one who was the warrior of the tribe. She practices waterbending minimally in secret, but then all of a sudden, with whatever passage of time that we have, she can conjure up and keep up with a warrior
master,
and then keep up with Zuko, who is what we see to be trained to be a warrior since he was a kid. And okay, you might have the moon to enhance your power, but I still don't think that equates to somebody who's trained as a warrior and tactician versus somebody, you might be natural for it, but I don't think that's very well detailed in the story. But what did you guys think about Katara?
I think that they could have done. I'm erring on the same error as you, Jared. I just think that they, like, it kind of directly relates to what I was saying, kind of my whole gripe for the show entirely. They were just doing too much to begin with, and then because of that, there were things that were left out in the wind where you're kind of just left guessing, or just a little bit more just kind of unclear on. I feel like, man, they had the whole Northern Water Tribe thing, then they threw in Omashu, the King Boomy, and even the Freedom Fighters, and then Sai and his son, and then you also had the War Balloons, and then Admiral to General Zhao, and then they just had so many things that they were trying to work with in the very first season of this live adaptation. Whereas if they just like chose like maybe 3 things to focus on, things could have been way more better. Like like let's say development of benders was one of the things that they decided to focus on, and we could get more look into like Aang trying to get over his like mental block of like, I need to train other elements, and trying to do that with Katara. I mean, he blatantly just said no. Like when Katara said, "Hey, we could train together," like that was weird. But then even with Katara, go ahead, yeah.
Or Aang accepting that in a war, there's people who are going to get hurt,
right? Like we could have had more experiences with that, but then we also got Koda Face Sealer, and it's like, why is this happening already? The Spirit Realm and all that,
and the owl. That's like,
why is the owl here? Yeah, it was a whole thing, and then so specifically with Katara, it's like one of the things that I really liked about her character in the cartoon was that you saw her develop into this master level where she may not have been able to keep up with Paku when they did fight, but she put up a good fight and people were impressed. This one, it feels like they almost gave her the win. Like maybe not like an explicit like, okay, you beat him, but like everybody knows that you could have beat him if you had more training or something like that, right?
It was too equal for me.
And it's like
she can get to that point, but not this fast with what they showed us.
At the beginning, she could barely make a water ball, but at the very end, she can keep up with a water bending master and like do ice and everything like that. I was like, again, it all relates to my main complaint of the show is that they were doing too much in too little time. But I was really just like, since when did Katara learn how to do this? Or like, when did this happen? Right? Maybe they could have like alleviated it with dialogue, or again dedicated more time to it and like put other things on the back burner. But
even with the ice thing, like all of a sudden she knows how to freeze the water.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing to know how to manipulate it in its current state, but now you're changing it and manipulating it to a frozen state. Like I feel like there's so many levels that they went through so fast with her character that they did in the animated series, but again, that took 20, 40, 60 episodes.
you could
to do.
feel like you could almost be put through like, wow, this really took time, as opposed to we're doing this already. So,
Jager, what did you think of Katara?
I think there's a lot of sentiment with Katara. A lot of like, okay, we're just gonna give this to you. And it was like, all right, like, okay, this is happening now. Like, and what I really just want to note about Katara is in the animated series, she's constantly talking about her mom and her connection with her mom. And the live action series, we only get one scene with her mom. And
it was at the
end. Yeah. And that's really like the only thing about Katara's character that we see. Yeah, her developing character inwardly. And then outwardly is just like she has no previous war experience, but then she's just saying with her mouth, you know, I've done this. We've fought all these firebenders, and like Master Paku has gone through years of technique.
Right.
But let's note that Master Paku is not Sokka.
Right.
almost feel like they watered down Katara.
They did do well with still addressing the gender role thing, because I was very surprised that they still addressed that in today's...
Like, yeah, women are not supposed to be feminists.
Right, yeah, which was impressive, because I know that was a huge point for her in the animated series, that this Northern Water Tribe doesn't allow women to bend for war, and they only do healing. So I'm glad that they left that in the series.
Agreed.
But again, like we talked about, there's ways to articulate and show this character developing into their own versus how we got it in kind of this rushed format in season 1. But overall, let's give some final remarks for Avatar: The Last Airbender season 1. So, Jedd, we'll start with you. What are your final remarks about Avatar?
Avatar: The Last Airbender's live adaptation is not the most horrid adaptation we've had of this series in terms of being a live adaptation. There were things that were enjoyable. There were things that I liked. It looked good. It was engaging for the most part. But there were definitely a lot of things that they could work on. And I think that in terms of being an old Avatar: The Last Airbender fan, watched the series when I was a kid, being hyped about this release kind of becoming a thing in the works, right, and hearing about it, the excitement that I had for it was not realized in the way that in the most capacity that it could have been. But it wasn't the worst thing that they've done with the series so far. So I think if I had to kind of summarize my experience with the live adaptation of The Last Airbender, I think it was a good start, but we definitely still need to have the training wheels on still and kind of slow the roll and kind of work with it a bit more, assuming they get to work with it more. But I think that for what they did, it wasn't the worst thing. So I think it was I said earlier, maybe like a strong 6 to 7 out of 10.
Quickly, one thing that you'd want to have happen in season 2. Quick.
More Suki. But more actually in terms of the actual plot, I'd love to see Aang learn more bending. Actually
learn water bending.
Yeah.
He didn't even try it.
Yeah, he didn't even do anything, but all of a sudden he became a giant fish. And I know there was a whole thing with the ocean spirit, but I think what really grew on me in terms of Aang as a character in the cartoon was his growth in terms of learning other styles and having to learn those responsibilities as an avatar. We didn't get anything of him doing other elements in the first season. So if we're talking about season 2, main priority outside of Suki would probably be have Aang be more of an open bender.
Jager, what about you? What are your final thoughts, final impressions of season 1, and then one thing you'd like to see in season 2?
Final impressions of season 1. Thank you so much. I'm very glad to have been brought into an atmosphere where I can express my excitement. Season 2, I want to see Azula become Azula. I want
Where's the blue fire? Where's the blue fire?
Azula. And I am in high hopes that the writers, the directors, and the actress are going to take those lengths for us to see Azula become the Azula we all know and love.
I mean, I would have to agree with you guys quite a bit, but again, overall impressions for me with season 1. It's a very kid-friendly kind of story, not the most mature or, I don't even want to say evolve, but next level kind of storytelling. It's very simple for what we were given. A lot of it is based off of what I think would be the previous fans of the animated series and them seeing those awesome moments that we saw in the animated series brought to a live action setting. I love the casting. The costuming was great.
Yep.
The
Looks
songs,
good.
the combat,
Good.
the CGI was awesome. But when it comes to the actual depth that I love in these shows, that was lacking for me. So if you're wanting to just have a decent time with an animated to live action adaptation, then maybe give Avatar: The Last Airbender a shot. With season 2, I want to see Toph.
Okay.
I want to see...
Bring in the Blind Bandit. All right.
Yeah, but I want to see, like... I don't want to say dark, just because that's kind of my...
Go for it. Give us the gist. You got it.
But I want, like, the sadness of Toph to actually be portrayed. Because Toph's character is really, like... There's a lot of, like, sadness.
Because
that she goes
she's
through.
blind, she can't. Yeah.
Because she's blind, but she's the princess, but then she feels ostracized and protected, but then she feels one with, like, the badger moles. But, again, assuming Aang somehow learns waterbending in, like, 4 episodes and we get to Earth, I'd want to see Toph. Obviously, I want to see Azula and see how they actually flesh out that character. Hopefully we get short hair Zuko here a little more.
Shoot. Yeah.
But again, I think with Avatar: The Last Airbender, it's a pretty solid series if you're not looking for anything ultra exceptional when it comes to story and narrative. If you want fun things to look at and decent combat, this is pretty good. I think the acting is pretty decent. I love the acting from like Daniel Day Kim and even General Zhao and General Iroh. And then even the younger actors did pretty good in their roles too. But again, set your expectations properly when it comes to this kind of show.
Yeah.
And that's the gist of our spoiler-free and spoiler-filled review of Avatar: The Last Airbender live action. I'd like to know what you think of the show. What was your favorite moment of season 1?
And from where in the depths of your heart do you feel your emotion beginning to sprout?
Speaking about emotion sprouting, hey, I mean, if everyone got Suki's number out there, I would love to, become if she's Kyoshi, I'd love to become her Kyo-he. You know what I'm saying? What's up, Maria? Hey, how you doing? What's up? Hey, I'm a big fan.
Peace out.
What?